Welcome to a very special episode of the Not Another Yoga Class podcast and LinkedIn Live series. Today we have my mate Lizzie Simpson, who is the founder of the Emotional Wellbeing Company. Welcome, Lizzie.
Thank you so much for having me, Jamie. I'm really excited to be here.
So today we're going to talk all about ADHD and your experience with ADHD, which is kind of exciting because I got diagnosed with ADHD last year. And so what I'd like to talk about first is your journey with ADHD, what you were experiencing maybe when you were a little bit younger, and then when you kind of found out and discovered that you had this thing.
Yeah, so obviously looking back in hindsight from my diagnosis, which was about 4 years ago now, I believe, it makes so much sense that everything that I kind of struggled with prior to that was ADHD. But like so many of us, it was misdiagnosed. Oh, it's anxiety, it's depression. Kind of in my teenage years, it was, oh, she's just really misbehaved. And it was definitely categorized as a behavioural problem. And that conversation around neurodiversity just was non-existent. And it was something that I just would never have thought for myself, because I think a lot of us thought that it was something that boys have and girls don't have it. So there was just no conversation around that. But for me, my ADHD was always manifesting emotionally. It was emotional dysregulation through and through. And that is so debilitating because it wreaks havoc on every aspect of your life. So kind of starting at my school years, as I got into secondary school, I just really struggled with the whole dynamic of that. And actually, by the time I was in year 10, I'd been to 4 different schools.
Wow.
And that was I know, it's mad, isn't it? And I actually also missed out on a lot of schooling as well. I probably missed out on the best part of 2 years. I basically didn't go to school during year 8 or year 9 because I was having such overwhelming difficulties with my emotions. And obviously you throw into that, obviously I'm a woman, so starting the periods, the hormones, being a teenager is hard enough, as if you're neurotypical. And I've carried a lot of shame around that for a long time because it was so obvious that I was different, but nobody knew what it was, right? So everyone kind of just dismissed it as, oh, she's badly behaved, she's not bothered, she's causing trouble for the sake of it, she's an attention seeker. And obviously those narratives stick with us. So I was in this cycle kind of as I got into my 20s of, being okay, being depressed, being okay, being depressed. And I was in a dip where I was like, okay, I need to probably go and speak to the doctor. Nothing new for me at that point. And this one doctor said to me, has anybody ever spoke to you about ADHD? And I remember the conversation so clearly because I'd actually snuck out to take the call at work. So that very clandestine, oh, I really need to take this call from the doctor, but I don't want anybody at work to know what's going on. So I was kind of, sneaking out. And when she said that to me, I'll be honest, I kind of thought, well, no, because that's a learning disability. And I've definitely not got a learning disability. Like I would say I'm a very highly intelligent person. I'm, a real grafter. That's not me. This is something different. But the more she started to explain it to me, I was like, oh, okay, this is something. And then obviously that led to me being diagnosed. And that clarity has changed my life, because when you know what you're working with, it's like anything, isn't it? When you know what, I don't want to say problem because I don't see it as a problem, but obviously at that point it did feel like a problem because it was debilitating, because it had been mismanaged for so long. So when you know what you're working with, it's a breath of fresh air. And I don't know whether that was your experience when you were diagnosed, that you kind of go,
100%.
Hell.
It was. So my mum used to work in a school in what was called then the special needs department. I think that they've got a better name for it now. So she worked with the naughty kids. She worked with the autistic kids. She worked with those who struggled to learn in the conventional ways. And so when, as an adult, I came to her and said, so listen, I've got a lot of friends now who have ADHD, and I'm really starting to relate to some of the experiences that they're having. And you know that I've struggled in a lot of areas in life, and I think that maybe it's something to explore. And she shut it down straight away. She was like, nope, absolutely no way. There's no way, because you weren't a naughty kid. And so I kind of parked it then. And it wasn't until later where I read a book called Scattered Minds, which is all about ADHD, that the penny dropped, and I was like, it's like reading a biography of my life. It's bizarre. So yeah, as soon as I had that clarification, instantly it felt manageable. Right? It was like, I'm not different. My brain is different, but I can manage it. So yes, that was exactly the same as my experience.
Yeah, I think we're kind of a similar age, and I think there's a narrative kind of with our parents' generation that comes from a good place. I'm not slagging our parents off, but I think there's an element of fear of, I don't want them to be labelled. I don't want them to be labelled as that, because then they are evidently different. They'll be treated differently. Their opportunities will be different, and it comes from that fear-based thinking, right? Because ultimately, their number one job is to love and protect us. So
Yeah.
in those moments, you understand that, don't you? Oh, I don't. And with your mum kind of working with it on a day-to-day basis, she probably sees firsthand or saw firsthand when she was in that role, obviously, how people treat people who are different, and naturally don't want us to be in that position. So this is why having conversation like this is so important, because we need to change that narrative, because even though it came from a loving place, it has meant that, obviously for me personally, that I feel like I spent all of my 20s basically trying to reparent myself. And that's not to discredit my mum and dad. They knew what, they did what they could at the time with what they knew. But you could look at that and say, well, I've been disadvantaged in that way. I don't look at it like that. But some days when the ADHD is storming around my brain, it does feel a little bit like that, because I look at my friends who are neurotypical, and they're kind of hitting all of those milestones that are put on us, and I've not necessarily hit all of those milestones. And then you can kind of go, oh, it's because I'm different. It's because I've not got the support that I needed. And then without the proper tools and support around that kind of thought process, it's very easy to spiral. And that's obviously why so many of us do struggle mentally and emotionally with the struggles of living in this world that's not built for us.
I guess you've landed on something really interesting there, which is we're not hitting the same milestones as everyone else. And it's almost because we're not running the same race as everyone else, right? Because we can't. But that's not to say that we can't run a race that is really, really interesting, satisfying, and all the rest of it, kind of talk to me about your experience at work with ADHD. We've had a chat in the past about this, and I kind of want to hear from you what your employers in the past have done quite well and what you think maybe they could have done better.
Yeah, so I was in a job when I was getting diagnosed with ADHD, and I didn't share that with them. That was something that I just didn't want to talk about. And then quite quickly after my diagnosis, I actually moved to another job, which funnily enough, actually, was working for a company who supported kids with additional needs. So naturally, being in that environment where, I'll say that was their business. I don't like talking in that terms, but obviously that's the language they spoke. So naturally, the way that I kind of thrived in that environment, because they obviously understood what they were talking about, right? They understood it inside out. They had the resources for the kids that we were supporting. They had the knowledge and understanding, and therefore built their practices around that. So I was in a very unique position in many ways, because I was working within that sector. But for me, that was the longest job I've ever managed to hold down, because of that level of support. And also there was a level of trust in it. So I very much hate being micromanaged, as most of us do, right? We don't want someone breathing down our neck. It's the total antithesis of creativity. But obviously there's so many issues with that in the workplace. And I really struggled pre-diagnosis in the workplace, because I didn't know what I was working with. So obviously, how could the workplace know what they were working with me? That meant I was in and out of jobs all the time. I was always picking up temporary contracts, because it gave me this false sense of, okay, I only need to do this for 3 months and then I can move on. I can get through 3 months, or I can get through 6 months. And I was petrified of a permanent position, because for me, even though I didn't understand it as ADHD, there was part of me that knew I just wouldn't thrive in that environment. So when I had my diagnosis, and I kind of purposely started looking for companies that were in that space, landed on this company that allowed me to work from home remotely, which is full time, which is something that I needed at that point. I needed that flexibility and the trust that they had in me to just crack on with things, but also the support was there when I needed it. for me personally, that was the best environment for me to thrive in, because there was that level of, she knows what she's doing. We don't need to micromanage her. We don't need to be ringing her every 5 minutes to see whether she's, sat on a laptop or whether she's making a coffee or not working or whatever. And because of that, I absolutely thrived and created so much success for that company within my role. And it was all down to that fact that they understood how an ADHD brain worked, right? They understood that hyper focusing for kind of 3 hours, I'm going to get the same amount of work done that I would do in 8 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, there's responsibility, isn't there, to, maybe be on a call at 4 o'clock or whatever. But that flexibility piece of however I want to plan my diary, you do that. Obviously, it's just as long as the work's done, you do it how you want to do it, and turn up to the mandatory meetings that you need to turn up to and so on. And it is about that empowerment and trust of neurodivergent employees and all employees on that count to just get on with it, but also to know that you can pick up the phone, you can say, I need to meet you for a coffee, I need support with this. Actually, I need to finish at 3 o'clock today. I can't do till 5 because I've hyper-focused too much and now I've got a headache and I'm feeling overwhelmed. Let me have it and I'll be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock. And the amount, there was a good few times that I would phone my manager and say, listen, I'm just going to log off now and I'll make the hours back. I just need a minute. And she was like, yeah, fine. Because there was that level of trust. It wasn't like, oh, well, if you do that, you need to do this and da-da-da-da-da. It was implicit trust. And that is so important, isn't it, for a relationship? We know that anyway in our personal relationships, how important trust is. And that's what's needed, because I think there's still very much narrative that we're looked at as different, as problematic. I have a HR and recruitment background, so I understand from kind of a recruitment practices and kind of fair hiring practices the amount of work that goes into it in terms of the diversity, equality and inclusion hiring, which is so needed. But I think so many companies wrongly are turned off by that, and that leads to people not wanting to share their diagnosis. The amount of times I've taken somebody through a recruitment process, even for a company that is in the kind of neurodiversity space, and they would be declaring disabilities and their neurodiversity after the fact. So once we'd hired them, they would then disclose. And I was just kind of dumbfounded by that, because that wasn't my experience. When I got into that company, I diagnosed it, so I declared it straight away. So there's definitely still a fear.
That was my question.
I'm waffling on, sorry.
So no, not at all, because you're covering the things that I was going to ask. But I guess what I was going to ask is, there's a lot of people who would not feel comfortable in the position in divulging the fact that they are neurodiverse. And I guess my question really was, were you offering that information to them? Were you open about it, or was there an opportunity for them to ask? I guess that's kind of where I'm going with this. What was the situation then?
So they're pretty open in terms of getting people to declare first. They have a process that people can declare through, and it's a form that's filled out. So when I was sent that form and they were onboarding me, I was honest on the form and filled it out. I think maybe I just had a level of trust in the fact that it was an industry that was in that space, that they would be inclusive of me. I'll be honest and say, potentially if I was applying for a job now that was in a different industry, I might think twice. It would be definitely something that I would think about before doing. I wouldn't say I would blindly declare it, because those kind of worries that we have are valid, because actually we've seen it time and time again. I can't remember when it was, but there was a case a few years back, and it wasn't about neurodiversity, but I think it was about race, that somebody had submitted a CV to a company with their name, and it was rejected. Then they changed the name on the CV and they went through the process, and they were actually awarded £25,000, because obviously it was evident that there'd been discrimination there. So we know it happens. We always hear the horror stories in the news about it. And actually, fundamentally, all of us have a right to a livelihood, a right to work, and a right to prosper. So if we think that our neurodiversity is going to get in the way of that, I totally understand why people don't want to declare it. It's not right, and we need to look at ways in which we can change that. But I also understand the mentality of why people don't want to be open about it.
So I guess for the employer, because I've done a lot on neurodiversity now in terms of conversations around employment and HR and these types of things. And the thread that keeps coming back up, and it's come up in this conversation, is giving someone a level of comfort in which they are willing to divulge these things. And it all comes down to providing an environment where someone can say, I need this. Very simple. And this isn't a neurodiversity thing. This is a everybody thing. But people that would probably benefit more are probably the people who are neurodiverse, right? So I guess, would you agree with that? Is that at the very core of this? Is providing someone the opportunity to say, this is what I need to thrive?
For sure. And I think it's about the transparency and the culture of the company. So I think employee resource groups go a long way to this, and whether that's, you know, for LGBTQ, neurodiversity, women's group, kind of BAME groups, whatever it is, that goes a long way, because as an applicant to a business, if you can see a business championing those things, immediately your brain goes, oh, okay, so there's other people in this organization who are like me. So it's that representation piece, isn't it? And actually, I think including those groups in the process, in the sense of, okay, you've declared this to us during the hiring process that you have got ADHD. Well, that's amazing. We actually do a buddying system of members of staff who have worked with us for a longer time, who also have similar issues or similar diagnoses or whatever you want to call it. That encourages that level of safety and openness and trust in that process, because obviously trust doesn't come like that, does it? It's something that needs to be nurtured on both sides. But seeing that representation piece and seeing the investment and the prioritizing these kind of ERGs, I think goes a long way, because actually, if we don't see ourselves reflected back to us in the company, we don't want to engage with that. And then even if we do engage with it, and it feels like a bit of an afterthought, you know, oh, it's a tick box at the bottom of 800 different forms that you've had to fill out, and you know, it's an afterthought, or we're doing it because we're ticking the box of being, you know, following fair hiring practices. It needs to be that real connection that fosters that safety and trust.
Yeah, got it. I mean, this is loads of amazing insights here. Can you please tell us about the Emotional Wellbeing Company?
Yes, I would love to. Thank you. So, as I mentioned at the start, my ADHD very much for me was an emotional dysregulation issue. Obviously, sometimes I kind of struggle with the more external parts of ADHD, but one of the reasons it was missed in me is because outwardly I was that classic. I know I've said that I went to 4 different schools, but I still managed to get all of my GCSEs and my A levels and go to uni. So that classic high achiever of, despite all of that, managed to crack on. So it was always missed in that aspect. But emotionally, it was wreaking havoc on my life. And I kind of think that we don't talk enough about the emotional and internal struggles of having ADHD, because it feels good to bond with people, doesn't it, over kind of the, oh, I've got a flawed robe and all of those kind of funny things that we can all relate to. Because fundamentally, we are scared of our emotions. And that's not just an ADHD thing. We don't, especially in the UK, we do not love to talk about our emotions, right? I'm sure all of us have got a situation when we were little where we were crying and someone told us to stop crying or don't cry, even if it was meant with love. We just don't know how to facilitate our own emotions. And that's an even bigger issue when you're neurodiverse. And we obviously struggle with things like rejection sensitivity disorder. I really struggle with that strong sense of justice. So if I see an injustice happening, it really affects me emotionally. And then also just the emotional dysregulation of trying to live in a world and operate in a world that doesn't suit us, right? So for me, trying to do a 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, you know, having to be on 8 hours a day would wreak havoc on my nervous system and just make me feel burnt out all of the time. So through my ADHD diagnosis, I found an incredible tool called Emotional Freedom Technique. And that has been the one thing. Obviously, there's other things that have gone into it, but that's been the main thing that's helped me to really meet myself on an emotional level and to sustain being emotionally regulated, so that I can show up and do things like this. I can start my own company. I'm in a really brilliant place because of EFT. So I became an accredited Emotional Freedom Technique practitioner and founded the Emotional Wellbeing Company because I'm passionate about helping other people who are neurodiverse or struggling with overwhelm to manage their emotions. Because when we can speak to ourselves emotionally and understand our emotions and actually learn to feel them and sit with them, you process emotions in record time. It's such a profound experience. I would encourage anybody to kind of start to look at their own emotions, because we harbor so much and we push so much down, but feeling them is the quickest way to get rid of them. So I'm just on a mission really to get us all talking about emotions, and it's been born out of my own emotional dysregulation struggles because of having ADHD.
This is awesome. Look, thank you so much, Lizzie, for coming on and talking us through your experiences. It's been some amazing insights, and as someone who does have ADHD, it's been really great to have you on. So thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much for having me, Jamie. I really appreciate it.